Hi everyone, Peter here from Flow High Performance, and in this video I'm going to be continuing our series on the hypertrophy training guidelines, and this one is going to be on hypertrophy for the quadriceps muscles. So first we need to establish the anatomy of the quadriceps before we get into how to best train them for hypertrophy. So we have 4 primary quadricep muscles and 1 secondary muscle. So we have the vastus medialis and the vastus lateralis, which are basically named that because we have the medialis, which means it's medial, so it's closest to the middle of the body. Then we have the lateralis, which is located here on the outside of the thigh, which is lateral to the body, so furthest away from the midline. The vastus medialis is the one that, on people with hypertrophied quadriceps muscles, looks like a teardrop. The vastus lateralis is the big, longer one, which is located on the outside of the thigh. We then have the vastus intermedius, which again is named appropriately because it's in the middle, but that is not able to be seen on this diagram here because it's covered by the rectus femoris. So the vastus intermedius is actually located underneath this big muscle here. And before we get into the anatomy of the rectus femoris, we need to first understand that the vasti muscles, so the vastus intermedius, lateralis, and medialis, all attach here. They all attach on the kneecap, and then that travels over here and attaches onto the top of the shin bone. And then the other attachment is at various points on the femur. So it only crosses one joint, the knee, so it only has an effect on the knee. That's the only joint it actually moves. Whereas the rectus femoris, as we can see here, this big red muscle, attaches at the same point here below the knee, but it also attaches up here on the pelvis, which means it crosses the hip joint and it actually produces other movements, which we'll get into in a sec. So it actually has influence on the hip joint. We then have this long skinny muscle here, which is called the sartorius. Basically, we can pretty much ignore that for now. It basically has similar functions to the rectus femoris, so it crosses the hip joint and the knee joint, but it's much smaller than the other muscles, and it's not really a muscle that we particularly intend to target. But it is there, and therefore it is worth mentioning. So in terms of movements, as mentioned, the vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis all perform knee extension, as does the rectus femoris. It also produces knee extension. So if we're sitting down here with our knees at a 90-degree angle, and then we kick one leg up, so we straighten our knee out, that is knee extension. That's the movement that the quadriceps muscles produce, all of them. However, the rectus femoris and the sartorius, because they cross the hip joint here, they actually also perform hip flexion. So if we have someone lying flat on the ground, legs out straight, and they bring one leg up by hinging at the hip, that is hip flexion. So all the quadriceps muscles produce knee extension, but the rectus femoris and the sartorius also produce hip flexion. So, are squats the only exercise that the quads really need? The answer is no, because back to that idea of the rectus femoris crossing the hip joint, it has certain implications with our exercises. So because the rectus femoris and the sartorius, not so much the sartorius, but the rectus femoris is quite a big muscle and it contributes a lot to the hypertrophy and the look of the quadriceps, they extend the knee and flex the hip, as we previously mentioned. So when we're performing a squat, we have knee extension. So as we're standing up from the squat, the knee's straightening out, but we also have hip extension. So the hips are going from a bent position, a flexed position, into an extended position. So they're opening up. And the issue here is that because the quadriceps produce knee extension, so all the vastus muscles will be working hard. However, because during the squat we have hip extension, we don't actually get much contribution from the rectus femoris and the sartorius because they're basically shortening at one end and lengthening at the other end. So at the knee, because they produce knee extension, they're shortening there. If they contract, they extend the knee, but then they lengthen at the hip. So because the hip is opening up, they're actually lengthening at this side. So the rectus femoris and sartorius are not actually going to be worked very much by squatting because of this idea. So we do need to perform other quadricep exercises if we want to maximize the hypertrophy of them. So what exercises do we want to perform? The compound lifts are going to be the primary component. So back squats, front squats, leg press, even though they don't primarily work the rectus femoris or the sartorius muscles, they still get all the other quadricep heads, and you're not really going to find a better exercise for them. So the important thing to note with back squats, front squats, and leg press is that we want to use as much range of motion as possible. So we want to squat down as deep as we can, as long as we are staying safe, because that is going to put a big stretch on the quadriceps muscles and also therefore have more work for them when we stand up, because they're going from a very stretched position here to when we stand up, they'll be in a fully contracted position. And then because of that issue we had with the rectus femoris and sartorius, we probably want to do some leg extension only exercise. So a machine leg extension will work perfectly, and that is just to make sure we're fully hitting all of those quadriceps muscles. So an example of how we can program for our quadriceps, we might have 2 days a week where we squat and then do leg extension. And again, we'll probably want to stick in the lower rep ranges and heavier loads for the compound lifts. So maybe 4 sets of 6 here and 4 sets of 8 here. So we'll undulate the volume and intensity. And with the leg extensions, we'll have slightly higher reps with slightly lower loads. And again, we'll undulate that throughout the week. So back squat 4 sets of 6 at 100 kilos, for example. Leg extension 4 sets of 10 at 40 kilos. On the other day, we have back squats 4 sets of 8 at 80 kilos, so slightly more reps, but slightly less weight. And then leg extension 4 sets of 12 at 30 kilos, so again, slightly higher reps, slightly lower load. And that's it for this presentation, guys. Thanks for watching and hopefully you got something out of it. And make sure to stay tuned for the next videos in this video series. If you're a curious individual who's interested in learning more about sports performance training, you can find Flow High Performance on Facebook and on Instagram. On these platforms, you'll find hundreds of these research infographics, which are the latest research summarized into these easy to understand pictures so that you can stay up to date with the latest research without actually having to go into the journal yourself and reading the entire article.